Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Let's do some pod crashing. Episode number 303 is with Alex Campbell from Murder 101.
Man, I'm wonderful. It's a beautiful day here in East Tennessee.
Oh, my God. Let me tell you something. Right, you just saying that, I've got to do this right off the bat. I love the Southern accents and the quality of it inside this podcast because I'm over here in Charlotte and we're being invaded by a lot of people from Ohio, California, Florida, and the authentic Southern accent is not here like it used to be.
Well, thanks. That's something I wondered if people across the country would like my accent, think it deducted a few IQ points. But it seems like people like the slow, melodic kind of storytelling aspect. So I hope people are enjoying it.
You know, one of the things that I've kind of joked around about here, being in the South as long as I have been, I've always said, people go, well, where does a Southern accent come from? And I said, it comes out of the heat of the South because it's so darn hot out there. It's hard to talk.
Yeah. And up here in the Appalachian Mountains, you know, we're kind of isolated a little bit. Our dialect's a little bit different. But it does. You're a product of your environment. You're taking this from a history teacher, right? So this is what I think about all the time. So you're right on point with that one.
Oh, Alex, I'm so proud of you on this because I too am an instructor, and getting into the minds of those students is a very difficult thing. And for you to take a chance on this is just mind blowing because you ignited an entire classroom and beyond. Yeah,
well, you know, who deserves some chances more than our young people, right? So what I've found is that they're full of energy. They can be creative. They can be very resilient. They can work very hard. You just have to give them something that they feel has real meaning in the world. And if you do that, my students have never let me down.
Yeah. The way that you build this podcast, because, I mean, you give them the opportunity as that instructor, as that teacher, you lay it out there for them, and then you kind of challenge them. Okay, if you want to do this, you're going to have to step up your game. Even when you brought the FBI guy in, I mean, it's like they had to earn that position or that next level of the game.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think as teachers we need to do a better job of. And instead of chasing the child with education, begging them to pay attention, you know, look up here, you know, it should be to put them in a situation where they want the education. And that was really one of the greatest experiences of my life. Every day I came in and students said, how do we know why this guy didn't like women, or what happened in his family, or how do we, why do these women, why haven't they been identified? Like, why isn't their family looking for them? And I basically said, oh, you want me to teach you about sociology? And they said, yes, we have to know this to do our work. So they were pursuing the education, and that's a great position to be in as a teacher. Everybody
knows somebody who has red hair. And I'll tell you what, man, when the very moment you started talking about this in the first episode, all of a sudden I'm going, was one of my friends, was an uncle, I mean, an aunt, anybody involved in this when it was taking place in the South? Because you're sitting there going, I haven't seen them in years. What could they be?
Yeah, and, you know, that was something interesting about the case, which, of course, were called the Redhead Murders, is that not all were redheaded, but many of them were, or reddish hair.
Yeah.
And it's a very intriguing, you know, little thing that should attract a lot of attention, but for some reason, for the last 30 years, had been mostly just forgotten.
Yeah. Listeners need to understand that Murder 101 on iHeartRadio takes it one step at a time. And I realize that everybody wants to know who done it. But the thing is, though, is that your students put the compassion with the victims. And for them to go and build a profile for the victims. Oh, Alex, come on. That was magical.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we had in the beginning was the victims. We had no suspects. We had no access to any of the police files. It was just what we knew of the victims. And so the profiler taught us that actually by looking at the victims, you can learn about everything you need to know about your suspect. And so, you know, that was it at first, gathering the information and examining each one. But what happened throughout the course of the semester was that the students really began to empathize with these women.
Yeah.
And they even began to call them their sick sisters. And that might be what I'm proudest of.
You know, one of the things that you put out there for people to understand, first of all, this is pure journalism. What you're doing is exactly what journalism is supposed to be doing. This is not an episode of 60 Minutes or CBS Sunday Morning. You lay it out per episode, and as a listener, we get to ride along with you, but we also get to try to figure it out with you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Like, you know, KT Studios and their production team has been great. Like the long form podcast is exactly how this story needed to be told. And there were other people and and other ways that, we're interested in this story, but you can't do it in 42 minutes.
No.
You really can't. You can't combine like 40 years of history researched over 6 years by like almost 50 students, that you're looking at 14 different victims and 6 or 7 that are probably related. Like, that just takes some time. And so I like this way. I think it's the perfect way to tell this story.
One of the most haunting things in this podcast, Alex, was when the students started doing the profile of each person, because as a listener, I didn't know who they were, but I kept hearing about them. But the very second that they started doing one after another, you get this chill in your body.
Yeah, that was something that I was curious about. It's kind of long. There's so many victims. And, that took some time to go through. And I was hoping that people, would stay focused with us. And one of the things I wanted people to see is, like, this is the same person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the young, white, redheaded woman, small build, who's estranged from her family. She's out on the road, sometimes involved in prostitution or something. And she has no one. And she's an easy victim. And this is the person that got picked up and victimized over and over and over again. And why nobody else could put this together,
right,
that these women were all related, I don't know. But hopefully after listening to that, you understood that, like, this was the victim he was looking for. And that's why it showed it was the same suspect.
Now, Alex, come on. We know why they shoved this underneath the carpet. The reason why is because exactly what you said, that they were women of prostitution and they weren't doing clean things. So let's just don't even talk about it. Out of sight, out of mind.
Victim shaming. Women who were in very difficult circumstances because usually their life was just terrible at home.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been put in these situations, and then they become a victim. But it seemed like in the media, they just drug these women through the mud. They asked for it. They should have known better. What did they think was going to happen? Oh, she had a really long, criminal history of drugs or prostitution. And so my students really, I think they cut through all of that with their little teenager minds. Teenagers know what it's like to be put down and discredited and blamed for things. And they didn't really buy into that. They really wanted to be an advocate for the women.
Yeah. Shane Walters is mentioned in this. And listeners need to understand that Shane played a big role in this. But you guys take Shane's words and you grow beyond something that a journalist put out there.
Yeah, so Shane Walters, he was the only one looking at these cases other than us. And we found each other on Facebook. And he was, he's very supportive. And what he did was he actually amplified the work of the students. He came down, he covered their profile in the podcast. He put the profile out there. He let students speak on his podcast. And, because of all the attention that it got through Shane, and of course, that's actually how the first woman was identified, was that she was listening to the podcast that featured the students talking about this profile, talking about these victims. And she noticed that victim we were talking about matched up with a woman she had seen that had gone missing recently on a website she was looking at. And so she was able to give the tip to Shane. He provided that to law enforcement, and we got the first break on the case in almost 35 years.
Oh, my God. See, it's stuff like this that really fascinates me. To me, it's like the seed becomes the tree becomes the leaves, it becomes the paper that the author or the journalist writes on. And it's almost every bit of this has played out. You, with your passion for true crime, bring this to your students. Your students, I can't imagine what they're going to be doing in their everyday life from this point forward. Lives are being affected because you took a chance.
Yeah. But we've got to do that, right? I don't think anybody says there's not enough problems in the world. There's so many problems out there, right? And let's let the kids be turned loose and just give them a chance. I mean, what if they don't solve the problem? Well, nobody else has solved it yet either. But, what if they do? And that's the question. Instead of worrying about the negative, what if they don't? Let's just give them the chance and say, but what if they do?
One of the most important parts of this journey, I love the way that you come out and you say, well, we've got to have a good title here in the way of identifying what this case is. And you guys broke it down and came up with the best title.
Well, it's funny because they had just identified the Golden State Killer. And one of the things that happened in the Golden State Killer case was that, one lady got really interested. And she took this terrible name, East Area Rapist and Original Night Stalker, the Erons, and said, nobody's going to pay attention to the Erons.
Right.
And she gave him a more a title which actually fit better and actually kind of lets you understand the gravity of who he was, the Golden State Killer. And eventually you had a prosecutor who ran on figuring out who the Golden State Killer was, and wouldn't you know, they actually did it. So we wanted to find a good name that would be picked up by media. People would notice it, because the problem with the cases was that nobody had noticed them in 30 years.
And one of the things that you identify, and you keep bringing it up, was Highway 75 as well as Highway 40. Now, here in the Carolinas, I-40 is a huge part of our breath. And so and then to see how you actually, some of the profilers were in Virginia. I mean, my God, that whole, you took a picture. It wasn't just right there in Tennessee. You took a picture of the entire southern region.
Yeah, because what you had a highly mobile suspect. And eventually we find out who this is, and he's traveling between Illinois, Tennessee, and Texas. So some of these victims were just right across the line in Mississippi or Arkansas, or Kentucky or wherever. So we really couldn't just keep it to Tennessee. We had to really think like a long-distance trucker.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they even think of state lines. They think more of highways and routes, and that's the way the students had to think about it.
It scares me that when you guys identified it as a trucker, first of all, I was sitting in the front seat of the car and I went, of course. But my real father was a trucker, and it made me think of my real father, because these guys have personal lives. We don't know about the wives that are at home, but yet they could be out there being killers on the road.
Yeah, that's the one thing about our suspect, was that everybody said he was the nicest guy. He would give you the shirt off his back. But when you're out on the interstate and you're away from your family, that's who you really are, right? When you can be your own person. And of course, one of the greatest parts of the podcast is we found the only victim that survived him.
Oh my God.
She had not given her story. It had been over 40 years. She eventually agreed to tell her story through our podcast. And I told her, you're probably the only person alive who ever saw him for who he truly was.
Alex, there's got to be people reaching out to you in the way of, that you guys worked this out, you planned it out, you gave to the future. I mean, even my own mother-in-law was murdered, and we have no idea who it was. And it's like, I just want to come to you and say, can we work together, your students, and let's try to figure this. Plus, it also gives me an opportunity to learn what you did, how you profiled, how you got people connected, so that maybe we can start something.
What I tell people is, and law enforcement officers get this, we work with them a lot. We just had 8 law enforcement officers from 5 different agencies that worked with us last semester.
Wow.
And what I think they get is that time is very precious when you're a law enforcement officer. We know why cases go cold. There's not a lot of leads. You get new ones. You just don't have the time. But think about students. We've got 25 students in a classroom. They have 90 minutes a day, every single day. Multiply that times 25 and think about the amount of work that the students can do. Now, maybe they don't have some of the knowledges and skills that you have, but just that amount of work that it takes to read and look and investigate to find that one little thing that changes the case, that's where the students really excel.
Let me ask you a question. From one instructor to another instructor, there's always that one student that sits in the back row that is very quiet, never participates. If I were a fly on the wall, was one of the people in your classroom that person that came out of nowhere and said something, and everybody goes, holy crap, I never even thought about that?
Yeah, we had, it happened a lot. And there were people at the press conference. I said, look, I want you to think about it. And we need some students to speak. I'm not going to do this. You're going to do it.
Yeah.
And there was a young man, and I don't think anybody thought of him as a speaker or a leader or a very studious person, to be honest. And he said, I want to do this. And we had a long talk about how important it was. And he said, no, Mr. Campbell, I'm going to put everything into it. And I remember that boy wore an old rock and roll T-shirt and ripped up jeans every day. But when he came in for that press conference, he had on a suit. That hair was pulled back in a ponytail. And you could just see how much it meant to them.
Dude, how did you hold the tears in? Come on, you had to have lost it.
I'm on tape a few times with a little quiver in my voice. I'm a pretty passionate person. Since I've had kids, I'm a little more emotional than I used to be. But it's like a parent. I couldn't be prouder of these young people and the work they chose to do for people who had been forgotten. And you just see them grow and mature and do amazing work. And I mean, that's how teachers get paid. It really is. I mean, I have a payday once a month, but being in the classroom and seeing these students, like, you can't put a price on that.
Do you find yourself growing beyond the podcast and turning this into a television show of some sort?
Oh, wow. I don't know, really. If you think about it, I didn't even think it would get this far. Like, I'm talking to some guy on the other side of the country. I'm talking to people in Charlotte, and we're talking about this case, and I never thought it would get this far. And so, look, it's just in the Lord's hands. Whatever happens, happens. But I do know one thing. One more woman needs her name back, and 5 more families need to know exactly who's responsible for their loved one being killed. And so we've just got to keep going.
See, it's that compassion right there that keeps me glued to this podcast. And I know when I get to that final one, I'm going to be upset because it's going to be like, come on, Alex, I need another one. Give me another one.
Yeah, the good news is, like, new things are happening every day.
Yeah.
We just had a victim identified a couple of months ago, one of our victims. And I've just made contact with her family, and there's really nothing on her, but her story is amazing. And so, look, we're just finding more stuff all the time. This podcast is bringing in more tips. We're finding things we never knew existed. We're finding newspaper articles you can't find online because people are hearing it and wanting to help. So there is going to be new stuff happening all the time. I guarantee it. And who knows? Maybe we'll have an a season 2 before long.
And you know what's going to happen here, Alex, is that people save their news stories in boxes that are tucked in the attic or underneath their bed. And the more and more that this gets out there, people are going to be bringing those stories to you.
Yeah, we actually found out about a murder which could match this one. I mean, everything seems very similar about it. And actually, the victim had kept this because, of course, after she became a victim, she wanted to know more about it, and she kept up with it. So she actually shared it with me. And when I contacted the sheriff's department, they weren't even aware that they had that murder and have no idea where the body is. So there's just so much work that needs to be done.
Where do you find the time to do other things in class, or is this 100% your only thing in the classroom?
So there's different ways of doing projects, but the way I do it is project-based learning. So we're doing the project. That's what we're doing this semester. But, I'm teaching the skills and the knowledges they need from sociology so they can do the project. So some people kind of lose sight. They're like, are you doing a project or are you teaching like the standards? I'm doing both, right? Because you have to have that knowledge to do the work. The only difference is the students understand why, when, and where they need the knowledge. They ask me for it, and then I give it to them, and then they immediately apply it.
See, that's what I do as an instructor, is that I will show them what the tools are, but they've got to go into the broadcasting studio and do it themselves, because I don't want an Arrow clone. I want them to find their own skill.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, as a teacher, I design the instruction. I figure out maybe what I want to talk about or what they need support with, or who do I need to bring in, or what activity we do next. But really, it's going to take on a life of its own depending on the students. And you can never exactly predict what's going to be learned. I mean, I can predict what I teach, but you can never predict what you learn. And the students always learn more than I ever expected.
Oh, my God. I am so proud of you, Alex. You've got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
All right. I could sometime tell you the story about the next semester when we got a woman out of prison who was serving 25 to life. But maybe that's a different conversation.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. And don't lose that accent, because, John Boy and Billy have kept their Southern accent, and they've done a lot of great things here in the South. So don't lose that accent.
I don't think I could ever lose this accent. So I appreciate that.
All right, man. You be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you, sir.